Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to European Policy Platform, yet into one of our webinars. We're happy to have you here. We today will be covering the protests in Belarus, their influence in the region, and everybody's reaction to it. And we have wonderful, absolutely fantastic guests today. So I would like to start off by introducing Natalia Arnaud. She is the president of Free Russia Foundation. I'm very happy to have you here. Franek Viachorka, he is a Belarusian. Would that be the correct pronunciation? Or Belarusian? Which one? Oh, by the way, let me unmute you.
Belarusian, it's better.
Belarusian, and Vitis Yurkonis, who is joining, I hope I pronounced that correctly as well, do fix me if I'm wrong, who is joining us from Lithuania. So before we continue, just quickly to introduce you about European Policy Platform. We are a UK-based nonprofit, non-governmental organization. We have pretty much been created just this year, and we survive off of your donations. So if you will like the event, please subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and you can also donate to our PayPal, but we will talk about it more a little bit later. So without any further ado, I do want to start with Natalia Arnaud. Natalia, you have a lot of experience when it comes to Russia and when it comes to the United States as well. And I'm sure that Russia, as a country that has a long history with Belarus, has a lot to say regarding the conflict. So could you start off by explaining what is the sentiment in Russia and in the Russian media regarding this situation in the country, in Belarus?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Ekaterina, for inviting me to this event, and many thanks to European Policy Platform for organizing this timely event. It's really great, and it's a huge honor and pleasure for me to be on the same panel with, as I consider, the most knowledgeable experts on the region in general and on Belarus in particular, Vitas and Franek. It's really great to see you, even virtually. Hope that very soon we'll be able to travel again and I'll be able to see you in person. Probably the only criticism about this event I would have only regarding its title, which is a future of the last European dictatorship. Being from Russia, for us it's very difficult to call Belarus the last dictatorship and Lukashenko last dictator, and we see it a lot in Western media, and it drives us crazy because, again, having Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin's regime, it's again, we understand. And I immediately remember the words of the slain Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, who was assassinated in 2015 near the Kremlin, who was saying that basically Putin and Lukashenko, like twin brothers, tyrants, two of a kind. So I would rather refer to Lukashenko just like one of them. So for several months now, the entire world has been focused its attention on the events in Belarus, and there's many participants of those events and commentators, and describe it. And as we all can just see, just looking at these numerous videos and photos, especially posted by Franek, so that what is going on in Belarus now, it's basically the battle between the good and evil. What we see is that Belarusian people really fed up with a 26-year ruler. We see them courageous and tireless fight for freedom. We see an increasingly inspiring and even a leading role of women in Belarusian society and in protests. And we see just absolutely outstanding creativity during the protests. And this firm commitment of Belarusian people to keep protests peaceful. So I really believe that the case of Belarusian protests will be for many years studied and described in many textbooks on nonviolence protests. So it's really absolutely amazing. We also see this unique national mobilization of Belarusians all over the world, this increased and strengthened national identity. And also very happy to see this great, especially civic solidarity with Belarusian people. And of course, on the other side of all this, we see this dictator clinging to power, who just fears his own people, underestimates his own people, whose regime used an unprecedented and inhuman violence against protesters. And as it's very typical for all the dictators, they just don't see that the problem is themselves. And even all these recent mistakes they made, for example, mishandling the pandemic, they just don't see it, and they blame all the problems on these foreign interventions, on foreign governments, on different actors who he named. Just remind me: Soros, Navalny, Khodorkovsky, and so on and so forth. And also we see another dictator, Vladimir Putin, actively backing his fallen comrade. Just because in his world overview, dictatorship should stay in their place, and just no transit to democracy should happen under his watch. And of course, a more appealing idea to Putin would be a more loyal and a more predictable ruler or ruling structure in Belarus, because he neither likes nor trusts Lukashenko. But at the same time, according to the Kremlin's logic and playbook, just impossible to have any immediate concessions to protesting people. So, and even if Kremlin is going to play some, and already is playing a bigger role, backing up some other candidate or whatever, other person, of course, it won't be immediately. So as we see, Putin supports Lukashenko with words, just congratulating him immediately after the fraud and just not fair elections, or promising all this reserve to be sent to Belarus immediately. He backs him up with actions by restructuring the debts, promising some more funds, replacing or like equipping him with soldiers of disinformation war, those who replace spaces located in the Belarusian state television channels, and so on and so forth. And of course, Lukashenko is playing this card, targeting the most sensitive point of the Kremlin, saying if Belarus fails now, Russia will be next. So, and we also see Putin's game like for many years with Lukashenko, like, I don't know, since 2015, when he's pushing him to have to deploy military bases and equipment in Belarus. So there will be more and more of that, as Ekaterina was asking to say. Is there going to be any military intervention? Again, many commentators agree that probably not direct military intervention. It's not in Kremlin's benefits, I would say, but it's very increasingly creepy influence, just more and more influence there. You asked about how Russia.
Natalia, let me just ask the question. I really apologize, but you are going right into that, and the reason why I want to ask is so the viewers understand what I'm asking. You are speaking about the potential future of what is happening in Belarus, but could there be a chance that something like what in Ukraine could repeat? Fine, let's say it's not going to be a direct military intervention, but something else. Like, do you think Russia is planning for what could happen if the protests are going to be successful?
I'm sure Franak and Vitas will speak more about this, because they see more and more evidences of Russia's presence in this or that form in Belarus already. There were a lot of articles on that. Again, it's better. It's more beneficial for the Kremlin, again, not to directly military intervene or send troops, but to have this huge disinformation war already for both Belarusian audiences, for Russian audiences, for international audiences. They already are doing that, to co-opt, to infiltrate maybe a coordination council, to do some other things that they usually do all over the world. Typically, all the playbook is already there, so we can study it very, very well. As for Russia's reaction, again, you asked about Russian media. It's very different. We always say that it should be very clear distinctions between Russia and Putin's Russia, between Kremlin and, again, between the pro-Kremlin, for example, media outlets and the independent media outlets. Of course, they were all portraying it differently. All Kremlin, don't watch it and try not to, sometimes for some purposes, again, just to analyze them. We have to, and it's like it brings a lot of headache and it's a really huge toll on your health, mental health, to watch channels. Yes, but of course what we saw, it's a lot of actually there was no unanimous support of the Lukashenko's regime, especially during the election campaign, when actually Lukashenko himself was more anti-Russian, the most anti-Russian candidate, I would say, when he was saying that only he can save Belarus from like being swallowed up by Russia, becoming Minsk Oblast of the Russian Federation, and so on. And so many even like very huge propaganda people like Solovyov, Skobiev, and others, they were again sometimes mocking Lukashenko, sometimes again doubting many things. But in general, what Russian official TV channels did, they were showing that Lukashenko is a legitimate president. They were downplaying the size and the scale, yes, of Belarusian protests. They were focusing more on very often staged by them provocations and people to comment, so that again it's very fitting with Kremlin's narratives. And as a result, we saw recent polling results, including by an independent pollster Levada Center at the end of August, when we saw quite depressing numbers that like 2/3 of Russians believed that Belarusian protests as a result of provocations, or half of people don't condemn police brutality, or 57% of Russians wanted to have Lukashenko as president, or like 39% having negative attitudes to those protests, which is very understandable, because again, when you are under effect of this 24/7 zombifying propaganda, this is your result. But at the same time, they were in the same poll, we saw very inspiring results when 28% knew that Belarusian people are just tired of such long rule of Lukashenko, when 23% were aware and were saying that those protests are because of falsifications of elections, and 17% were saying that it's because of police brutality, and 37% in general doubt that elections were fair, and including 18% saying like it's like completely unfair. And actually it's very interesting that it's mostly among younger generations, and again it shows how different is this group, and it's a very growing younger actor in Russia and in Belarus. I believe that they get the information not from again these official channels, not from television, but through internet and through social media. And what we also saw at any event on Belarus conducted by us, by our partners, by many people that we were observing all summer and in September, they still under huge attention, and they were the most watched discussions, the most popular. Like we saw how Navalny Live and many like Rain TV and many others were again streaming, have all these live streams on events in Belarus, and they were having like millions views, and people want to see more and more and to understand more and more. So there is this also again growing demand of Russians to understand the situation and to support. We see more and more Russian expression of solidarity, different petitions not to recognize legitimacy of Lukashenko from many groups, civic groups inside Russia, or experts and so on. So it was very wise, for example, for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya yesterday, I believe, to appeal to Russian people, and I will suspect that those people who advised her to do so are here on this panel. So it was really, really very smart, and it's one of our biggest weapons, this solidarity, and it's really great. And also we saw from the very beginning that protests in Belarus were not anti-Russian at all. As the more Kremlin was engaged, the more Putin was supporting Lukashenko in public. We saw some anti-Kremlin messages, slogans, posters, and so on, but not again anti-Russian. We also see a very interesting parallel between protests in Belarus and in Khabarovsk, and it's also great to see this connection. And we see how protesters in both places are talking to each other, supporting each other. Like in Khabarovsk, they were saying Belarus, Khabarovsk is near, or in Belarus, there were banners saying Khabarovsk, we are with you, we are together, and things like that. It's really great. It's a lot of similarity between these protests, because they both are horizontal, leaderless, when again Svetlana Tikhanovskaya or this trio, they were more symbols of protests rather than leaders. Right now, it's more and more again political actions, but especially in the beginning, as we understood it, it's again very, very symbolic action. And the same in Khabarovsk when Furgal it's not about Furgal, for example, governor who was detained by the Kremlin, but it's more about the Kremlin's control over the regions. It's just dissatisfaction that when you voted for somebody, when you chose somebody, and then the Kremlin can just so fast decide it and take this person away. So it's again a lot of parallels. You also asked me in your questions about Moscow protest of last year, 2019.
I think we will. I'm very sorry,
Okay, yes,
Natalia,
I know.
because we are unfortunately
Sure.
limited by one thing in this lifetime. But everything you've just said segues very nicely into our discussion with Franak, who I'm sorry, we're trying to. Franak, I believe you have to unmute yourself for you to be able to. There we go. Hi, Franak. Pleasure to have you here as well. Now that Natalia touched on Tikhanovskaya, I would actually like to first and foremost start with the opposition. Throughout every time I would check the news, every time Tikhanovskaya would be mentioned, there would be a few very vital questions asked. So I'd like to play the devil's advocate and ask them to you. One of them is very obvious. Why so many people are out protesting, and why, if there's such discontent with Lukashenko, he was so comfortable rigging the elections to such an extent where he gets 70-80% of the vote.
Oh, I think people just got tired of him because he's old school. He represents the previous generation. He belongs to this, Soviet past. He's like Lenin for young people, somewhere there, but doesn't belong to their reality. And people who were born in independent Belarus or just lived in independent Belarus most of their life, they just don't recognize Lukashenko as the person who can help or represent their interests. Also, Lukashenko has made several mistakes. He stopped. There was always like the social contract between Lukashenko and the society that you don't go to the politics, and I will give you basic stuff. You can have basic salaries. You can do whatever you want. You can even travel to Lithuania or Poland for shopping each weekend. And if you don't mess with politics, you can even earn money. That was, for example, the factor which enabled high-tech sector developing in Belarus. But suddenly, that was not enough for people. And Lukashenko, actually, he didn't protect people when they faced the real problem, the COVID problem. And people realized that they are not protected. Authorities do not try even to help them. They saw people dying, they saw people getting sick, and authorities were repeating that you can be treated with vodka and sauna and other stupid stuff. And people began helping themselves. And when they began helping themselves, they began building infrastructure of civil society. And this civil society was getting more and more healthy, more and more robust. And civil society was already strong enough to mobilize people before elections were announced. And when elections were announced, this new civil society helped new representatives of Belarus society, new candidates to build the campaigns. And many people worked for collecting signatures, for promoting alternative candidates, and made really, really strong cases. Authorities were shocked. They didn't predict such development. And instead of balancing or playing with these candidates, they began arresting them, putting them in jail. This happened to Babarika, this happened to Tikhanovsky, the husband of Tikhanovskaya. And as the result, people got outraged. They began protesting. They began more and more coming to the rallies. And these rallies, they were absolutely opposite to Lukashenko's rallies. That's another factor. Lukashenko's rallies were the Soviet-style parties, with this Soviet flag, Soviet dancing and music, and the opposition rallies, democratic rallies, they were like a festival. So many people joined them not only because of principles or values, but because it was cool. So this coolness, it just matched with a demand for something new, with a demand for changes. And when all the candidates were paralyzed, opposition unified around Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was not a professional politician, but she was the person very symbolically representing the aspiration of this new generation of people. She is young. She's 37 or 38 years old. She will be tomorrow, right? So she's actually a person, who didn't belong to this Lukashenko's generation, and for whom Lukashenko is like Lenin that I mentioned. And people found herself as the symbol of these aspirations, and they put her on a flag. And Tikhanovskaya became the politician, but also she became the leader and the symbol of the protest.
I'll just, I apologize, my mic is muted, but this is leading on to a next very important question. I'm also very young and beautiful, as you see right here, right? But, no one is particularly going out and putting, my face on the posters. And many of my
you
friends
never
even
know.
ask this
You
question,
never
why
know where you
Tikhanovskaya?
will be tomorrow, especially if you live in.
Obviously, I'll be on Vogue. But my question is, why specifically Tikhanovskaya? What, other than, let's say, her appeal to the younger generation, I will even ask this way, what even pushed her to go out and protest? Because she could have stayed out of all of this or made a statement on Instagram.
Because she's very strong personality, because she has position on major issues, because she also passed this path from very apolitical person to very engaged person, along with her husband, and she understands very well what people want when they go to the protest, when they go to the rallies. She is exactly a quintessence of all this protest, beginning in May and continuing right now. The person who just discovered the reality recently. She discovered, the real situation with political repressions, the real situation with corruption, the real situation with Belarus economy. She realized that it's enough to live under oppression. It's enough to live under the Soviet-style dictator. And she knows how to speak to people, basically. And people love her because she's authentic. She's not lying, she's not playing. And this created the fantastic combination, this non-violence discipline on the streets, and very peaceful, very positive agenda and narrative promoted by Tikhanovskaya. And this quintessence and this perfect combination, it creates these fantastic mobilizations on the streets, because these two movements, Tikhanovskaya's statements, Tikhanovskaya's messages, go very well along with the creative character of the marches every Sunday and women's protests every Saturday. And this is why the protests continue despite all repressions, arrests, because people feel comfortable being on the streets and they feel winning, they feel advantage in front of these brutal, dark forces represented by armed policemen and soldiers.
So you're now speaking about Lukashenko and his personality. And I recall that in 2019, you spoke with the US Helsinki Commission and you described Lukashenko and all of his partners as, and I have to quote this, Homo Sovieticus, which is a very, very nice name to use. So why do you think he is choosing to hold on so hard to this Soviet identity? Wouldn't it be far more comfortable for him to switch the gears up and say, all right, I hear you, the public, you want something more modern, and not necessarily step back, but take better steps to modernize his country, which would at least allow him to stay in power, but, not have to face hundreds of thousands of protesters?
Because he's stubborn, because he is not flexible in his political career, and he never was, because he is egoistic and individual player. He doesn't know how to work in the team, and he doesn't trust anyone, including those who are nearby. And getting older and staying in this position for so long, he lost this political feeling. Yes, he is political animal, it's true, but he is not the same political animal as he was in 90th. And the methods this political animal was using 20 years ago do not work anymore in the time of YouTube, Telegram. He's still the product of the Soviet system. He's like the Soviet nomenclatura style guy, who can only appoint the people in his power vertical. And now this power vertical is collapsing, and the best thing he can do, he's just doing patchwork, quickly changing the people. When one minister switch with the opposition, he's quickly changing him with another politician, official. They're not politicians, because politician is only him. And this was his mistake as well, that he had to listen if he wanted to stay in power. Now he lost his legitimacy. Now he lost his influence even inside of the country, and the only force that listen and stays loyal to him is law enforcement agency, including Ministry of Internal Affairs and KGB, and his personal security. That's it. The other part of the power vertical and the government is paralyzed right now.
So, regarding the opposition, we have seen quite some disturbing things happen with the opposition. So Tikhanovskaya had her life threatened, and she's now, as I recall, she's in Lithuania. And we had other opposition candidates who are also threatened, kidnapped. So on who right now will the protesting public rely on, or do you think they don't need a face for them to continue marching forward? And adding on to that, what do you think is going to happen in the near coming future? Do you think that there's a big plan prepared to really double down on the protesters?
Tikhanovskaya is such face, and authorities make a mistake when they think that if they detain, arrest, and put faces in prison, the protest will die. It's not about that. Tikhanovskaya is representing something much bigger, something nationwide, something unstoppable. She is the spokesperson of this new Belarus, of this new the nation that revealed itself recently. And there is institution created by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the Coordination Council. Authorities are trying to paralyze the work of this. They arrest all the members of Presidium of this Coordination Council. But I think it will continue, because it's not about public talking heads. It's more about idea and about the plan. If the plan is shared by everyone, and the plan is pretty clear, to bring Belarus from point A to point C, from this protest movement to the new elections. If everyone will be sharing this plan, then the fight, the resistance will continue. But yeah, Vitis perhaps can speak more about Svetlana, because he helps a lot in the Vilnius.
You all are helping me just majestically segue into our next guest. So Vitis, it is time for me to actually question you. And the questions will be hard, honest, and serious, especially as you will kind of be answering a lot from perspective as a Lithuanian, as a European, and as a great ally of westward-looking people that live in countries that are currently dominated to a big extent by Russian forces. So with this in mind, why do not only Lithuanians, but your Baltic neighbors as well, care so much? Yes, it's across the border, but you're a member of the EU, NATO is by your side, you could just lay back and, relax.
Yeah, thank you. I think that Lithuanians are more than just neighbors, and Baltic countries are more than just neighbors. It's not only about the geographic proximity. And when it comes to Lithuania and Belarus in particular, I think there are plenty of things that unite us, like history, culture, like people-to-people contacts, and even more so, we do understand, or rather perhaps feel, the fight for freedom. Like we experienced that 30 years ago, and whenever we see that fight for freedom, I think we are feeling the empathy, the solidarity, be it in Georgia, be it in Ukraine, be it in Russia, be it in Belarus. So, and when it comes to what is happening now in Belarus, there were like at least a couple of solidarity actions. They're trying to, in a way, do something similar, like with the Baltic chain. There's like one of the biggest non-violent actions ever in the history of the region, where more than 2 million people were standing, holding hands together, like connecting Vilnius, Riga, and Tallinn. So there was an idea to actually connect the one B, Baltic countries, with another B, Belarus, and make sure that this Vilnius-Minsk connection is there. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, there was another action like that, connecting Vilnius and Belarus, the Medininkai point, and there 50,000, something like 50,000 people participated in that action, basically prolonging this Baltic chain. So in a way, we are in solidarity. We are very much supportive, and I truly hope that this regional record of 2 million and a bit can be beaten in upcoming weeks in Belarus, and they will have the biggest nonviolent action in the history of the region pretty soon, because really hundreds of thousands coming out despite all the repressions are very inspiring, and the fact that they are entirely peaceful. I think this goes big credit to the Belarusian people. So, and it's not only about the solidarity actions. There were like crowdfunding initiatives, like Go Belarus. We collected more than 200,000 for the victims of the repressions. Lithuanian politicians are very vocal about that. But our relationship to Belarus is, in Facebook terms, it's a complicated relationship. On the one hand, we have really good, wonderful people-to-people contacts, really a lot of things happening across the border, economic ties and tourism, both are good, but the governmental level is somewhat complicated, especially because of the nuclear power plant. But not only that, mainly the main issue and the main concern is that we cannot simply trust official Minsk. And I think that neither Belarusian people nor international community as of now can trust official Minsk. I just want to pick upon a few things that were said by Franek and Natalia. One thing is that I do think that when we talk about people who are in the protests, we are not talking about the opposition. I think that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is also pretty vocal about that, by saying we are no opposition, we are the majority. The opposition is Lukashenko and basically very small group of people surrounding him. I do think that the protests also are not only driven by youth. We see the entire spectrum from youth to pensioners, and it's not only Minsk, it's also smaller cities and towns. And I also dismiss that argument as if, certainly when it comes to Lukashenko, he was always and remains to be the main Kremlin's guy. Kremlin has invested so much into him that they certainly don't want to lose him. They might give up on him at some point, but at the moment, and I think that the West has been like misled for years by this narrative as if Lukashenko is the guarantee of some sort of the Belarusian sovereignty. If he was the guy, he would have done anything, regarding Kremlin's influence. But unfortunately, that was quite the opposite. Within the 26 years of his rule, Belarus became so dependent on like Kremlin and energy, military, economy, information-wise, that it's basically the only protector of the Belarusian sovereignty. It's Belarusian people, and I think that's what they are showing. It's gonna be a very complicated battle. I mean, to answer one of your questions, why Tikhanovskaya, I think that she, like what Franak said, she really embodies the protest. But I think that what's even more important, that she is the symbol. It's very hard to beat the symbol. You might force her out of the country, but you cannot get rid of this symbol. And what she is symbolizing is the fact that Lukashenko is the reason why the potential of the Belarusian people were not used to full extent. We couldn't see the real Belarus under Lukashenko's rule, and she, as a woman, as a mother, of two, who was not involved into politics, skyrocketed within basically few months, showing that an unimaginable potential of every single person in Belarus. And I think that's what's so powerful about her and her story, and what encourages and motivates a lot of people in Belarus.
Let me, I apologize, because again, it's because of time, so I'm very, very sorry. But I do want to ask you a few important questions relating to
Sure.
you being a European. So you have Belarus, you have Russia nearby. And obviously, as with Ukraine and Georgia, there's a lot of tension when you're bordering these countries. So what actual threat is there, if there is one, in light of these protests, that you guys could potentially face? And I'm not talking about your ambassador just being sent out. It would be a repetition of question to Natalia. Could there be, we've seen a military aircraft even fly to Brest. Could there be some sort of a military action, or would Russia and Belarus be too afraid?
Well, let me say this. The thing is that Belarus was seen by many international experts only through two lenses. One, which was geopolitical, east to west. The other was opposition or Lukashenko. And we were missing a big picture, which is civil society, people, human rights, democracy. So geopolitically speaking, of course, the threat of Russia is there. And to be honest, during that solidarity action that I mentioned, there was the so-called battle at Medininkai, that the balloons were hit by the Belarusian military aircraft. We lost that battle, or the balloons lost that battle. But speaking more seriously, honestly, you do remember the story. The Green Man first appeared not in Ukraine. Something like that happened during the Bronze Soldier story in 2007, and that happened in Tallinn. So yes, we are mindful that all sorts of provocations are possible. And yet, I think what the small countries and Baltic countries understand, that the only way for us to survive in the international system, for the small states like us, is that international order based on norms and principles do apply. The world where unaccounted money and brutal force is dominating, we are in a very vulnerable position. The world where international law, norms, principle, human rights, rule of law, you name it, dominate, that's where we feel safe, secure. And that's why we are so vocal. That's why we are supporting the cause, because what is happening in Belarus, it's basically the call for dignity, human rights, rule of law, and that's what we are standing for.
So with this in mind, and we're slowly actually, and I'm opening up right now the panel for either Natalia or Franek to answer, but I'm asking you first. What power does the European Union, which you're a member of, actually have in dealing with the situation? Brussels is on the other side of the continent. Ukrainians and Georgians already completely think that the EU doesn't even care about them. Could this situation also happen with Belarus? EU expresses condolences, says, we're very sorry, you guys remain passionate and hammer down how there's human rights violations, and then in a few months the interest disappears.
Thank you for that question. It's an important one. And honestly, EU, I think, is best at their like soft power and smart power. Perhaps someone might say that soft power is something very soft, and what we are dealing with is like the Kremlin, with all its unaccounted money, corrupt practices, and brutal force. But this is their playground. The playground of the EU is actually the same: international norms, rule of law, and democracy. And I think that it's very easy to hide behind this cliche of EU can be only concerned and concerned and concerned. I think Europe starts with every single politician and diplomat in Europe. I mean, be it in Lithuania, be it in Germany, be it in France. If we are vocal that we do care about democracy, human rights, and rule of law, then Europe is going to be vocal too. If like anyone is saying that Europe can be only concerned, what I'm reading is that they do not want to be vocal or take personal responsibility and hide behind the vague, EU concerns. So that's an easy one to just run away from the responsibility. But aside from this moral voice, which is important, I do think that there's a lot to offer in terms of the reforms and financial assistance, and that's going to be needed during the transition. The transition of Belarus is inevitable, but first things first. I mean, there needs to be a first step: free and fair elections, and that's what you should be calling for.
So we have one more question, because we have so many wonderful questions by our viewers, and this is kind of an offshoot of the question I've asked you, Vitis. This one goes to Natalia and Franek as well. So a few weeks ago, Deutsche Welle comes out with an article titled "EU Threatens Belarus with Measures Against Those Responsible." Strong. Die Welt, a week ago, writes, Russia's ruler, Lukashenko, will not appear on the EU sanctions list. Germany in particular has campaigned for this, supported by France and Italy. So why is there such a division in the EU between the West that understands, as we like to think, understands democracy, constantly talks about democratic principles, yet, hides behind the smokescreen, and the East, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, who constantly campaign for reforms in post-Soviet states? Why are they hiding behind the smokescreen? What is the benefit? Is Nord Stream 2 very much that worth it? I open up this question to all of you.
Thank you so much. Very good question. We are also very concerned about, and we believe that what is really important at the moment is to have very strong European unity. And when we see how Lithuania, the Baltic countries, Poland, those countries who, again, have the best expertise on the region in general, and Belarus in particular, how strong they are in their messages and their support, probably the strongest is Linas Linkevich's words about Lukashenko, former Belarusian president. And of course, sanctions list, when Lukashenko himself and his son and others are on this sanction list. And while at the same time, Germany, Italy, I think France are again saying that Lukashenko shouldn't be on the sanction list. There should be some opening communications with him and things like that. We should also add the US to this list of the West, divided West, which is very self-centered, and with all these upcoming elections and other internal problems. which is like behind even this split European Union voices, though State Department and of course the US Congress, they were very outspoken about immediately right after the elections about doubting again the elections, about support to the right of Belarusian people to choose, and of course condemning all this brutality of police and things like that. But again, not as outspoken as the European Union. But what on the other hand, what we see in the US, it's better equipped with the punitive measures, and Lukashenko and his son, some other immediate relatives, and the head of the Central Election Commission, Yegoshina, and some others who are implicated in these political disappearances of 20 years ago. They're already on the list, and this Belarus Democracy Act of 2004 still is active. There were even reauthorizations of that in 2006 and 2011. So it's already in place. They kept, the US kept this, and they can just designate more people to this list, even without using this global Magnitsky Act mechanism, which is very complicated to place people violating human rights on that sanctioned list. So again, yes, very important for the West to have all these coordinated actions. It's important for the US to have more communications with the European allies and to be on the same page, and again to show this moral support. As Vita said, moral support means so much even before you the Western countries can have some policy actions. At the very least, what the Western international community can do is to show the support to have more communications with Tikhanovskaya, with Coordination Council, with the people of Belarus. So this is very, very important.
Maybe you want to add something? You are muted, just so you know.
Yeah.
There we go.
No, let me just support Natalia and Vitis in this. So we are seeking now, of course, for the quickest solution for Belarus. The general idea is to make this transition so quick as possible, because more time we waste, lesser chances, first of all, for peaceful resolution, and second, more costs on Belarus people. And Western participation, the foreign participation, of course, it is not acceptable in the form of military or political pressure, but this solidarity gestures. I'm just like I was just tweeting the same moment about the this 20 ambassadors coming to the Svetlana Alexievich house, Nobel laureate, and protecting her from police. This is also very important. So I think, when speaking about the international relations, very important to ensure that the European Union presence is on all levels, from the very soft, the level of symbols, gestures, statements, to the highest, that's the level of legitimization. And it's very important to ensure that they talk not just to Putin and Lukashenko, but they talk to Belarus people. And Belarus people are on the streets right now, as Svetlana Alexievich actually mentioned yesterday. So Lukashenko has to stop talking to Putin and begin stopping, and has to start talking to people, and the people are on the streets. So I really encourage Western democracies, to consider this. And I know that sometimes it goes against the protocol. I know that politicians are not used of talking to people without formal
commoners,
government instruments. Yeah, but it's not about this. The situation in general is very uncommon, and the uncommon situation needs uncommon solutions and uncommon approaches. This is why Lithuanian position today, the resolution by Lithuanian Seimas, is very important. They recognize Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as legitimate leader. They cannot call her president, perhaps not yet, but they call her leader. Of course, it creates the casus, it creates the precedent, which can be followed by other nations. And sometimes small nations, they can have a huge influence on the bigger ones.
So I think it's time now to switch to the Q&A, to the questions the audience asked, because they actually asked amazing questions. Again, as I've said, it's down to the panel, as our viewers have not mentioned that it's a question specifically to somebody. So the first one is by Maxim Kuyak. What makes protests in Belarus so unique comparing to revolution in Ukraine, protests in Khabarovsk? And don't you think that peaceful nature of protests in Belarus is a weak point? I'm confused by the end, but I presume is a weak point and not an advantage. Oh, I'm sorry.
I know that Vitis is a big expert on this issue. I can say that for now, this peaceful character allowed this protest to be so sustainable and to be so powerful and to be so massive. Because only a small percent of people, even in such a difficult situation after being tortured and beaten, only a very small percentage ready to resist with force. You know, and when the force begins and authorities are trying to move these protests, you know, from peaceful and make them violent, they want to limit and reduce the number of protesters. That's the pragmatic explanation. But also there is this moral explanation that, you know, that you cannot beat violence with violence. You know, and when we speak about the European identity of Belarus, and when we speak about the democratic awakening of the nation, it's very important to keep this style, consolidated. You know, to keep this branding everywhere. And I think right now there is a consensus and there is balance. It looks somehow stylish, you know, when it all stays peaceful, creative, nice, you know, with all these cartoons, jokes, humor, mixed with serious demands as well. But I don't exclude, honestly, when Lukashenko will start shooting people on the streets, and if European Union will be just closing eyes and say, no, it's okay, you know, it's their internal issue. If the cost of using violence will not be raised by foreign players, then of course people will need to protect themselves, you know. But let's do all possible to avoid it.
So I presume Natalia, Vitis, none of you have anything to add, because we have some interesting questions actually, maybe directed right at Natalia.
I'll just agree with Pranak that, of course, peaceful character of the protest is a strength of Belarusian protests. It's yes, it's great. Yeah, Vitas is showing. Yes, of course, more powerful. Exactly. Yes, and it as soon as it radicalizes, it polarizes the society inside, but also it will, out of such a global inspirational strive of Belarusian people for freedom and democracy, it will become just an internal issue of Belarusians and many international countries and communities, and they just won't engage because it will be too violent, for example. And so, of course, it's great that for so long the protest keeps its commitment to being
so
peaceful.
We have another question by Andriy Yanitsky, who asks, could the protests from Belarus spread to Russia?
Protests of Belarus inspire many Russians. Protests in Russia started in Belarus also they were for many years, not only just this year. In 2011, 2012, they were the biggest protests since the collapse of the Soviet Union, but they were in big cities mostly. In 2017, the protests were geographically bigger in at least 200 regions, and even which we call the sleeping regions, inspired by Alexei Navalny's viral video on the corruption of Prime Minister Medvedev and things like that. And what there was the quality of the protest was completely different, because this time we even called it the protest of school children and students, because people were like from 13 to 25. And we see more and more actually protests happening in Russia almost every day somewhere. There were huge protests that everybody heard probably about in Arkhangelsk, where protesters won and these landfills were stopped, or in Bashkortostan in last summer, and in Khabarovsk now, of course. But there are protests like everywhere all the time, and Belarus protests inspire in many ways.
So another question, and a very interesting one by Matt Kupfer, who asks, if Lukashenko leaves office, what will happen to the Union state? I'm curious for your predictions of the future, if that happens. Natalia,
If Lukashenko leaves the office and there will be somebody pro-Kremlin there, then of course it will be fine with, I guess, with the state union, and they will continue supporting that another regime, just with different name. But if protesters prevail, and what we hope for, at the same time, we shouldn't think that it will be immediately like the ultimate victory. Of course, for so many years, Lukashenko was building these authoritarian institutions, and when the protest, when pro-democracy movement wins, it will be another long-term way to build democratic institutions, to again strengthen civil society, which was like under such a huge pressure. And this is where again the international community can help, the EU, the US, with all this, how to again these capacity building programs with many others. It's a long way, but it's a very important way.
And speaking of unions, and this one I think Franak will be able to answer much better. Alexandra Hill asks, how has the Belarusian economy responded to the protests? The only thing I know about the Belarusian economy was before you guys changed something with your currency, a Big Mac costed 18,000 Belarusian rubles, and I think that shocked me. So that's about it. But what is going to happen now with the protests?
So the ruble has begun falling after the protests began, after the crackdown. So first of all, people felt that the situation is not going better soon, and automatically this public intuition reacted with buying all the foreign currencies. Also, people began taking their money out of banks. So now banks imposed limits on taking money from the credit accounts, from the cards. So now you cannot withdraw your money easily from your bank cards if you want. And we see that not just about financial system, it's also about the economy in general, about the companies. So some strikes have started as well. Even few days of strikes, they damage significantly the production of such giants like Belarus Tractor Works, of a metallurgical plant. And I think Lukashenko is afraid of strikes much more than of the peaceful protest, perhaps. Of course, peaceful protests create the huge pressure on him, but strikes create the immediate threat to him. And he understands that he needs money badly to pay all these police officers, KGB, and the huge army of officials that are actually loyal only because they are getting paid. And he understands that now he needs to find additional source of funding to compensate all this loyalty guys. And he asked for the credit from the IMF. IMF declined, and now he asks for help from Putin. And in case of Putin, will give him some credit line. So it will help Lukashenko to let's say, preserve more or less stable economy for further 2 or 3 months. But even 2 or 3 months, it's not enough. I think Lukashenko understands very well that if the protest will not stop, if the dynamic of the ruble falling down will stay the same, in a very short time, it will just collapse with all his power vertical, very dependent on these resources.
I presume nobody else has anything to add? So we will move on. There's 2 questions, but they're very, very similar. So I'll just pick up Alex this time. So Alec Bertin asks, how can Belarusian protesters on the ground ensure support from the international community that gives limelight to their cause, but doesn't invite interventionist approaches to come into Belarus that could potentially endanger the citizens on the ground?
I think it's up to the Belarusian people, honestly, and what they have been doing so far proves that they know what they are doing. And despite all the skepticism, I've heard way too many politicians and international experts who are following the region by saying, "Well, it's a week, okay." 2 weeks, and now we have a month, and I think that it shows the resilience of the Belarusian people. But certainly, one needs to understand that the threat of the from Kremlin and their intervention is there. But I think it was always there, despite the protests happening or not. That's the reality. So the argument saying that better do not protest or because that might provoke the Kremlin. I mean, I don't understand that. It's just because the other alternative is actually worse because as I've said, Lukashenko is not guaranteed to the sovereignty, quite the opposite. He's basically selling out Belarus day by day. And unfortunately, the Kremlin's influence in Belarus is so high just because of him. He is the reason. So the longer he stays, the longer the Kremlin's influence is there, and it would be harder to go from that point. So whatever happens, and if there's a change, who's next, they will have to deal with his heritage, and that's gonna be complicated. The only thing is that that's a question to us, the Europeans. Are we ready to help to the Belarusian people? And I'm not saying to one or the other candidate, political group or party, Belarusian people to restore the economy, because currently Belarusian economy, except of the IT sector, and I think that coming back to the previous question, Lukashenko's regime was kind of boasting, though it was not their credit, but they have a vibrant IT sector. And during the protest, they were switching off the internet. I mean, basically shooting into their legs, and the IT companies, some of them are ready to leave. So restoring, rebuilding the economy, that's going to be a very difficult task. And yet, and the question is, are we going to be there for the Belarusians and for the Belarusian economy? I hope that we will be there. But again, first, things first, one step at a time. Without the free and fair elections, none of that is possible.
There's one more question we have. Unfortunately, this person did not comment on the live stream. It is from one of our posts relating to Hungary. And before I do ask this, on the advertisements for our post, we had a lot of comments talking about how Belarus isn't the biggest dictatorship, the European Commission is, or Hungary is. And so Magnus Hjalmarsson, I'm going to be banned from the country he's from for the pronunciation, asks, isn't Hungary becoming more of a dictatorship than Belarus? So how would you respond to all of these commentators and Magnus? The question is to all of you once more.
Well, if I may, just none of the democracies in the world, be it in the US, be it in Lithuania, be it even in Norway, is perfect. But that shouldn't be the argument for us not to care about democracies elsewhere. So the fact that Hungary is a concern and the status of democracy is a concern in Europe is legit. And I think it's also a thing to ask to Hungarian people. But I think the fact that one or the other country in Europe struggles or has difficulties or their democracy is imperfect is not an argument to say that we should forget Belarus or shouldn't be cheering for the Belarusian people who are asking for change and cheering for democracy and human rights.
Plus, this question probably will be very upsetting for Vladimir Putin. He's like comparing Hungary or Belarus. He would say like, I'm much better dictatorship. But this is actually, I'm coming back to that discussion we had about Homo Sovieticus and why all these narratives are around all that. And in Russia, for example, this is one of the main narrative, one of the main things mobilizing the society is around Russia's contribution to the victory in the World War II. And this is what the Kremlin is doing, promoting all these narratives. Like in the US, there is this national idea of American dream, for example. But in Russia, this is what mobilizes the society, and that's why we see a lot of militarization, a lot of like Sovietization. Even in this newly amended constitution, there is a special amendment saying that that Russia is the only real heir to the Soviet Union and things like that. But at the same time, it also has similarity, parallels with Putin and Lukashenko of being these Homo Sovieticus dictators, absolutely outdated, believing in an absolute power of television. This is how Putin came to power by reality show on television. Out of a board bureaucrat, he became such a macho global leader, wrestling bears and tigers and riding, I don't know, tanks and helicopters and taking like amphora of BC times when he dives and things like that. And so that they completely underestimate people, they completely underestimate the like new generation and how they get information and what they want, all this aspiration. Like the entire generation in both Russia and Belarus who want changes, demand changes, don't watch television and things like that. And thanks to them, we believe that again both regimes have expiration dates.
So speaking of an expiration date of a regime, there's a question by Malek Banar, who, I hope I said that right, who asks, how much change in the political cadre do Belarusians supporting the opposition expect? Is it an all new faces type of demand? So, Franak, you're supposed to back us up on this because you're on the ground.
Yeah. Okay,
is it going to be the radical path of sweep them all out, drain the swamp, or just get rid of one Lukashenko?
We speak about the faces leading the revolution.
Well, the question, as I presume, is more so like there's the protesters and they're saying we demand change. So are they demanding everything to be changed, or are they demanding specific figures to be gone, or everybody?
So we don't have everybody. We have the one guy who is leading the country for 26 years and who perceives this country as his corporation. He's like CEO and his shares are 100%. And he built this company for himself. And the only goal of this country was to serve his interests. All 26 years, this country was working for this one person. All these police officers, all these kolkhozes, all these enterprise companies, everything works for one person. And right now, it's not just we want new faces, or something. We want to, people want the new system. They want new system because this power vertical, this system of the governance existing in Belarus, it's created specifically for serving one person. What we don't want this corporation approach. We want real democracy. And this real democracy, it needs some transformation. It needs some new standards. It needs new rules. Of course, it needs new faces who will be managing this democracy. Not one person, the CEO, but a lot of people with different approaches, strategies, but with the same, I hope, values. And the aspiration of the protesters and the goal of protesters is actually to get to this from point A to point B as soon as possible. And it's not just about getting rid of one guy. It's about building something new, which will serve the interest of the people.
Yeah, like if I may add, the way I see it, like during the conversations with the Belarusian partners and some of the folks who came here, and Pavel Latushka, former minister, was here, like in Vilnius. What was that, Friday, perhaps? He was saying that to Lithuanian media, that generally even the officials are demoralized. They cannot understand why that violence is needed. But so it's really a question, maybe in a day, maybe in a week, some of them will step to the side of the Belarusian people. And from what we are hearing from the leadership of the protests or people around the National Coordination Council, that it's not that everything was going to be changed 100%, and that there is a future for those who are working at different ministries. However, those who were in charge of the falsifications and the repressions, justice needs to be there, and everyone in the after the elections, once the pluralism in the country is restored, is going to be equal against the law, from the former president to the prosecutor to the official at the Ministry of Economy. So, one way or another, we also need to say this, that those who are directly participating in the repressions, we are not talking about a huge amount of people. So those who were not committing crimes, I think that they should be feeling relatively safe, that there's gonna be a place for them in the future Belarus.
So, in speaking about the future of Belarus, we have around 10 more minutes left. So, Ross Gower asks, if Belarus is liberalized, how can they avoid potential widespread backlash in the future, leading to a rise of an authoritarian government, as has arguably happened in Hungary? And if I'm allowed to, I will, as a Ukrainian, I will even elaborate. How do you prevent a backlash in general? Because the fifth president of Ukraine was replaced by our current president, essentially in a revenge-style vote.
This is actually exactly why I was talking about building institutions. That for all these years, Lukashenko is having all these authoritarian institutions, and what is needed to be done is, again, have all these checks and balances, have the system based on the rule of law, have all these strong democratic institutions, strong civil society, strong media, everything else. And this is what is the main task for the movement. This is the main task for us in Russia, for example, because, for example, it's not about just only replacing Lukashenko with Tikhanovska, for example. It's having the entire system democratic. And in Russia the same. It's not for us just having Russia without Putin. It's to have Russia without Putinism, so that it's not based on this corrupt system with monopoly, both economic and political monopoly, with no checks and balances and things like that. So this is about building and strengthening democratic institutions. This is how we can prevent any backlashes.
Franak, Vitis?
Well, in a way, it's in the democracy, it's somewhat inevitable, right? That and one of the fundamental aspects of the democracy is to actually accept the fact that you lost. So in Lithuania, Professor Landsberg has been replaced by their former communist Brazauskas, who and his party, who became a prime minister and was a president at some time in Lithuania as well. So but democracy is like that, and even in transition countries, for instance, the president of Moldova, Dodon, won in the elections. Yanukovych at some point also won in the elections, and we might not like the fact, but it's also about accepting that sometimes you do lose, and we need to use and Democrats need to use all they need to care first of all about principles and rules of the game, and if they are like if they lose in a fair battle, they need to accept that. I think that's how democracy works.
So with this in mind, I'll ask kind of one last question to the panel, to our viewers. Some of your questions have previously been answered in the stream, which is why we're not asking them right now. What, from three of you, experienced people who have been in many countries, understand these concepts very extensively, what would be kind of, if you could give your biggest advices or your biggest wishes to the Belarusian protesters, if there is any?
Just lots of support. We admire you, we support you, we wish you victory, and we wish you patience, because it's not only again having replacing one leader with another, it's a very long-term marathon of building institutions, of becoming a truly democratic and free country. So we support you.
All right. So Vitis, Franak, I presume you guys have nothing to add in this case?
Generally, like, I admire the discipline. I can only say that, like, be creative as you are, don't give up. I think that there's gonna be a lot of, efforts to make sure that, people are kind of getting fatigued. Don't give up. I mean, that the like change is coming, and hold on there, like, for real. At least we are waving from that part, like from across the border, saying that Lithuanians are with you, and we truly are.
Franak's homeland is getting lots of love. So as we're rounding off, I want to say thank you so much to our wonderful guests. Thank you guys for coming here and telling us a lot of interesting things. And I also want to thank the viewers. We've had many, and we had very interesting comments. And as I mentioned, I do want to quickly drop our link, which is this PayPal. So if any of you who've watched want to donate to us anything whatsoever, the link is down below. And again, we have a Facebook page and a YouTube, so make sure to follow that. We host new webinars almost every 2 weeks. So I'm sure that, and also you can actually message us and recommend the topic. So once again, to the guests who's come here, thank you very much. And we will be glad to have you guys in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys. Take care and watch us next time.